In contrast to the Tupperware case, in which Tupperware decided to enter the social media space without much thought, without much reflection about who it was or its unique value, some of you might remember back in 2014, a very successful campaign that utilized social media as the preferred communication channel to both raise awareness of, in this case, ALS, and also to solicit donations. So this was the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And just as a reminder, you had two options. If you engaged in this activity, meaning that one of your friends in your social media network had tagged you and challenged you to participate, then of course you would film yourself and record yourself having ice dumped on your head if you weren't at liberty to donate dollars to the ALS Foundation. At the same time, you could still have fun by dumping water on your head and donating. But either way, it was a win-win, because if you didn't have the funds available, you were still raising awareness of the campaign and raising awareness of ALS. Now, what was great about this campaign, well, there are several features that were helpful about the campaign. But remember, with Tupperware, it didn't do the lifting as to how we're going to use social media. With the ALS Foundation, it absolutely did. The ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was the phrase that ultimately existed top of mind on the audience. Social media was the mechanism to then spread this particular top of mind phrase to any number of individuals in the network. And so the medium really lent itself to this activity, but the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, those keywords had already existed offline, so to speak. When we think about the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge or other campaigns that have utilized social media effectively, generally there's a sense of strategy that's involved with that planning. Now, Jim Lukaszewski gives us a pretty comprehensive definition here as the unique mixture of mental energy injected into an organization through communication, which results in behavior that achieves organizational objectives. And so I always mention to my students, an architect would never develop a building without a blueprint. Same would go for a communication manager. If you'd like to obtain a particular outcome, then it would make sense to discuss and describe how that outcome would be achieved using communication. So what is your unique value? And then is that shared across your key audiences? What do your key audiences know? What's some information that we have about them? Where are they tuning in for more information? And then what persuasive appeal might you be able to? So all of those questions are going into the strategic planning process. Now, who's to say if the ALS developers were thinking through that comprehensively, it may have just been fortuitous that social media was really well known, and those who developed, young people who developed the campaign, were active social media users. At the same time, we can retrospectively look back through the campaign and suggest that there was some thought that went into the selection of the medium to accomplish this ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. So strategy is a big part of successful organizational communication looking to achieve an outcome. The movement toward this process has also been called a management by objective approach, or MBO. And certainly that means that we're trying to tailor social media activities to an organization's business and communication objectives. Here's what we want to achieve. How are we going to go about achieving it? That's the big question. And that's where we have the SMART guidelines enter into the conversation. So I imagine you've had other classes or other experiences where SMART guidelines have been discussed. SMART guidelines also lend themselves to any type of communication planning. So as a review, SMART is an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, or I've seen it also suggested as actionable, realistic, and timely. So these are your guidelines on how best to develop an objective that you think your organization can achieve, in this case, using communication. So SMART objectives are really good for indicating organizational progress. Another example happens to relate to the potato board, now known as US Potatoes. But several years ago, the potato board was thinking about how do we hone in on one of our core strengths. After all, it is a resource for farmers, for growing conditions. It's also a great place for recipes related to potatoes. It ends up being all things to all people. Now, that doesn't mean that it needs to dilute some of its strengths. What it does mean is that the potato board can focus on a particular competency, which is then elevated and showing to be effective, meaning that there is some support to the claim the potato board can be a great resource for health conscious adults. So one SMART objective that may be related to that effort is this: to raise awareness of the potato board as the premier educational resource for health conscious adults by 5% in 2025. And so first we're looking at the organizational identity, in this case, discerning its unique value, that this particular organization is going to be the premier educational resource. The targeted audience are health conscious adults. So going back to our audiences discussion, it's possible for us to segment some of our groups who are tuned into our communication by lifestyle, by attitudes, by beliefs, those KABs. In this case, the communication is directed to health conscious adults, and the goal is 5% by 2025. So here we are in 2024. Of course, if this is an older video, then you can apply the same logic to have a yearly increase by the percent. The thinking here is that the potato board has a benchmark as to how many of their targeted audiences perceive the potato board as the premier educational resource, meaning the number one of all the other competitors. And then, of course, after implementing the campaign, revisiting those audiences and seeing if there was a 5% uptick. So that would be one way in which we could vet this objective against SMRT. Is it specific? Yes. Is it measurable? Yes. Is it attainable or actionable? Absolutely. There are a number of different communication channels that could be utilized. Hopefully those channels are coordinated. And then, of course, it's realistic and timely. We're looking at a year's time if it is 2024.